mobile gaming for me is like a war. If someone can spend more money to get those users, if you can't get enough money per user, you can't win. Like, there's not much else to do.
That sense of possibility, that sense of something out there that's interesting, that's catching people's attention, that doesn't really coming from the gaming section anymore. It really comes from more of like what types of traffic are available, the different types of platforms, the new types of channels.
Today I'm joined by a mobile gaming growth legend who spent over 18 years helping shape how games find and keep players. He's worked through some of the biggest studios and biggest shifts in mobile gaming, from its early boom to today's much tougher market. Mobile advertising got more expensive, but also where you can get traffic, organic, is so much harder.
The platforms themselves, Apple and Google specifically, used to be huge sources of organic traffic. In Social Point or in Playtika, we're getting featured. And those features could represent 3, 4, 5, 600,000, even 1 million downloads in a week.
We talked about why Apple permanently changed mobile publishing and what to do now, why rewarded traffic often fails for the wrong reasons, and where the next wave of advertising budgets is coming from.
You got your TikToks, Facebooks, Googles, AppLovin. I mean, those 4 are essentially covering like 90% of the entire ecosystem. And then the other category, which has sort of been on everybody's mind, tip of everybody's tongue, is the rewarded category. I think people still really don't understand it.
From someone who joined Playtika as his 10th employee before mobile gaming exploded, please welcome this episode's guest, co-founder and co-CEO of Trofeo, Adam Jaffe. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Very happy to be here.
Super happy to have you. So the reason we're here is because in February 2026, I had a mixer and I was with, I believe, the VP of marketing of Rovio. And he mentioned literally to me, he's like, you need to get him on the podcast. It's like, oh, why? And he was like, what do you mean? And he explained a little bit about you. And then we had a nice chat and we said, yeah, let's get it in the books. And we're here a few months later. So for people who don't know, Adam has been like at the start of mobile gaming, full stop. So I'm still scrolling on his LinkedIn, but to give you an idea, way back when at Playtika in 2011, and I could start listing companies. A lot of people who listen to this podcast might recognize Jam City, VP of Growth, Taptica, VP of Marketing, Social Point, and he's now advisory board for a lot of other companies in a marketing way. And he was the CEO of a mobile gaming studio, a lot since the very start. So what we wanted to talk about today is kind of lay of the land when it comes to the mobile gaming ecosystem, and also a kind of new marketing channels that have popped up. And yeah, basically Adam's pretty much the guy to talk about it. And it kind of, if you look at his LinkedIn, it will speak for himself. So yeah, I'm really excited for today. I would like to ask you specifically, like, why did you want to get on the podcast? Like, what did you want to get off your chest? Like, why is this an exciting time now?
As we all know, gaming has gone through some ups and downs and ins and outs. And, I've seen a lot in the last, 15, 16 years. And I wanted to get on the podcast because there's a lot of really new and interesting stuff that's out there in the market. And I hear a lot of different sort of conflicting viewpoints on, does this work? Does this not work? This is fraudulent. This isn't fraudulent. How do I deal with that? How do I make more money? How do I preserve, client, whatever retention ROAS? There's a whole kind of a lot of different narratives that are sort of pinging around out there. And it's always nice for me to rear my head up every, 6 months or so and just kind of lay my own kind of thesis on top of what's happening in the market, and wanted to sort of share my insights that I've kind of picked up over the last kind of 18 months with your audience.
Let's do it. So I like to tell people what to expect. So we're going to do a bit of lay of the land at the start. That usually works out nicely. And then we're going to talk about both kind of the new platforms that are out there, new marketing avenues, and then also the new markets. And obviously I will selfishly ask you some questions if I'm very curious how things work. So let's start with a very big question, kind of like, so what's happening? So you've been here, like you said, since 15 years. So Playtika's 10th employee. And for people who don't know, just Google Playtika. That means a lot. And if you contrast that to then to now, kind of what's changed and what should people be aware of kind of moving into 2026?
When I got into this space, it was, very much the Wild West. Facebook gaming was kind of at its peak. You still had a lot of the kind of web platforms like Pogo and Yahoo Games and Spiel Games, these sort of Flash-based, and in some cases like HTML5 wasn't even really a thing then, type web, portals. There was no mobile at that time, it was still kind of WAP devices and things like that. And App Store really had it was been around, but really wasn't sort of exploding in the way that we would see kind of later on in sort of 2012 and 13, as kind of a lot of those games that were big on Facebook obviously had their mobile kind of moments and then started pushing. A good example is when I was with Playtika and we were talking about our mobile game Slotomania. The sort of general thesis was, if this game makes $6,000 a day, we're going to be incredibly happy. That was sort of like the benchmark for us. And I think within the first week, we were at $100,000 a day. That just goes to show you, just like nobody really understood the space. Nobody understood how to capitalize on that audience, and it lent itself to a much more kind of rich conversation at that time. People really wanted to understand, how does this work? What are the right channels? A lot of that stuff was being built like as we were talking about it. There were from the MMPs, which were almost non-existent. I was lucky enough to have worked very closely with this company called ATT Tracking, which was one of the very first MMPs to come out, and they sort of were able, they listened to me and allowed me to kind of rebuild their system for what I felt like was kind of the better structure for kind of mobile marketing at that time. And in conjunction with sort of all of this sort of possibility that was taking place, you had a lot of VC money that was starting to kind of come in. Companies were getting sold left, right, and center. Obviously, Playtika, we were acquired by Caesars Entertainment. A lot of other companies with even just like a basic idea. You'll probably remember Draw Something. I think they had, I don't remember how many. They basically had almost no revenue when we were purchased, I think, for how many hundreds of millions of dollars by Zynga. There was just this kind of land grab, and so there was so much possibility flooding into the market. Used to go to these gaming events like Casual Connect and GDC, and it was just the buzz, the energy was so palpable. Fast forward to where we are today, it feels more like an insurance, an adjustment conferences. Very people are there. They're showing up. You see the same people. I'm not to say that the conference scene isn't dead, but what I do feel like is that sense of possibility, that sense of something out there that's interesting, that's catching people's attention. That doesn't really happen coming from the gaming section anymore. It really comes from more of like, what types of traffic are available, the different types of platforms, the new types of channels. Like, those are things that are AI is revolutionizing this sector, that sector. And so those become kind of the major talking points. But you never really, King isn't at these events, talking about this brand new, product that they're innovating against. Obviously, Rovio's got its RovioCon, and, they're doing a great job, like kind of promoting the different types of things they're bringing to the market. But that sense of like, what's next is more about what studios are closing, who's getting fired, rather than such and such is releasing this brand new game. Like, let's all get incredibly excited about it. So, over the last kind of, well, I've been kind of in the gaming space for about 18 years now. Sort of throughout my career, that kind of transition has really had these kind of very specific moments in time. And if I had to like kind of just draw back into sort of one key moment for me that really completely nerfed this entire industry, that was when iOS decided to deprecate the IDFA. And when I say deprecate, what I really am talking about is the ATT, that pop-up that was, in my opinion, quite predatory. This app wants to track you on apps it doesn't own, and are you okay with that? And they could have just gone the way of basically what GDPR did for cookie tracking, which is like, hey, this website's got some cookies. Would you like it? Yes. And it just became kind of like a default no-brainer click, versus today where, a lot of companies struggle to essentially buy media on the iOS platform. It went from, 80% of your revenue and your marketing dollars were going to be focusing on iOS. And that was like the go-to platform. You always launched first on Android, just given the fact that it was easy to make changes to the product. Obviously, the release cadence was faster. The approval process was quicker. And you would just sort of save and reserve that iOS because it was so valuable to you. And then once you had it sort of ironed out all your bugs and made sure your product was super tight, then you'd go on iOS and then you just buy the farm with that, right? And that's how these businesses grew. And so, what ATT did essentially was it killed the ability for companies to really take full advantage of the platform. It used to be that you could find the right users in places that you wouldn't necessarily find them. For example, a weather app, that has, I don't know, 10 million DAU. Now you can find your whale there rather than having to go buy him in a very specific kind of contextual environment. And so with that, we lost a lot of the kind of mid-core type titles that really needed those types of whales in order to be successful. and the whole industry really shifted aggressively into sort of, first it was hyper casual. Obviously, that has kind of not died exactly, but isn't quite the same level. Now we have this hybrid casual, and casual really have become like the dominant products that are getting released. And it just makes the industry not very interesting in terms of innovation, right? We've got a lot of companies, and they're doing incredibly well, right? The level of polish that we see coming out of these games that are coming out of China, obviously Turkey is just like absolutely crushing it. These companies have high levels of polish, high degree of talent in those markets. That being said, the types of games that are coming out are fairly prescriptive. You're not seeing some like crazy new game mechanic or some amazing new story. It's, this type of match game or this type of merge game or this type of, put this over here and then it does the thing. It's just not an industry now that I feel has that same level of passion, and I think it's also not necessarily a bad thing in all honesty. People got a lot smarter, right? VCs now know more about their like what a product needs to be successful. And of course, this is a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, you're not going to take a chance because it's not sort of something you've seen before. And so you don't have that frame of reference. 15 years ago, you hadn't seen anything, right? So you're like, oh, a game where you breed dragons and then they make things like amazing. Here's $10 million. Make that, And you had a
Yeah.
lot of that type of stuff happening, and people were excited to see these new types of products. And today, somebody might see, a strange mechanic that might not fit their play style very well, and they might just discount it immediately simply because you can't point and be like, see, we're making a Coin Master clone. Like, oh, okay, I get that. That's $1 billion game. Like, here, take my money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the industry has become a lot more rigid. You've seen a lot of consolidation, of course. You've seen a ton of studio closures, and people just not being able to make the types of games that were historically relevant, say 10 years ago. And today, what we see, obviously, we've seen this massive push into AI. It hasn't really panned out the way I think a lot of companies thought it would. Sort of say 2 years ago when we first started hearing about, certain companies, their whole platform was going to be AI generative, and then we're going to build these whole worlds, and every play session was going to be different. And today, Dream is still crushing it with, the games that they put out, and those are in some cases having AI underneath with either some type of, art. Obviously my artists that work with me, they tell me, hey, that used to take us 2 weeks to create, those little icons or whatever. I do those now in 6 hours, right? And I can polish them up and
Yeah.
deliver them really effectively. But it hasn't really changed the gaming industry like I was hoping it might, with really trying to come up with these kind of new and innovative ways to build games, to ship games, but also just in general, like, build me something that doesn't really exist. Take this mechanic and make something new. We're not really seeing that happening in the way that we were sort of told that it was going to happen.
Like, hearing you say that, like, it's for me to kind of put that in a nutshell. Advertising became so much more expensive. Almost, would you say like an order of magnitude? Maybe like we're talking a lot
Well,
more expensive. So
I,
like yeah, go on.
yeah, I'm not sure that it's that. Advertising's always been expensive. I think it's more that there's the sort of this other side to it, which is that it used to be that you had Facebook, right, which was like a great channel. You had your like Facebook group, which was delivering, to users. You had like what we call the K factor, or your viral uplift or your viral coefficient or whatever you want to call it. That doesn't exist anymore.
So the word
Uh,
of mouth you're referring to, like I remember playing all those Zynga games, and my dad was sharing every little thing he did on his Facebook, and I was like, "Dad, please turn that off." He's like, "Oh wait, what do you mean? Like, is that what you're talking about? The word of mouth flywheel?"
yeah, I'm
Or
talking about, yeah, that there was all, so there's this term called growth hacking. Today it means something very different than what it initially meant, but growth hacking in its sort of infancy, when we first kind of coined this term, really talks about hacking the growth of an existing network like Facebook, right? So Facebook had all this piping available to you in order to basically get the word out, whether it was like friend requests or shares or give me lives or whatever it is. And so Facebook had that infrastructure. And if you built into that infrastructure, you could grow your product utilizing their sort of piping and tools and technology. That doesn't really exist anymore. The second place that really has essentially dried up is that the platforms themselves, Apple, Google specifically, used to be huge sources of organic traffic, right? We used to talk about, I remember, in Social Point or in Playtika, we're getting featured. The whole company is now all hands, in a meeting. Guess what? On Wednesday, whatever, we're going to be featured, globally for this, this launch. And people would get so excited. I mean, it really was a kind of like check mark on the process that, all that sweat and equity you put into these
Yeah.
products, like this validation of all of that. Somebody out there likes me and likes what I've done, and now they're going to share it with the world. And those features could represent 3, 4, 5, 600,000, even 1 million downloads in a week.
Wow.
Today, maybe it's still kind of happening for certain types of products, but nowhere near at the same type of kind of level of proliferation that we had, say 6, 7, 8 years ago. I think it's a combination of just there's a lot more stuff out there. So, attention span is obviously shorter. People now want things that last only 3 to 4 seconds versus, longer form.
Yeah.
And so they just don't have maybe the patience to like go in and check every new kind of app that's launching. But that has really led to not specifically that stuff has gotten more expensive. It is now that you rely exclusively on your marketing in order to be a successful business. You essentially, 10 years ago, you could launch, you remember Flappy Bird, right? And that dude launched that game, was making 50 grand a day. And he wasn't the only person. And he had zero marketing dollars invested and his game just blew up. We haven't seen something like that happen in the last 5 years.
Yeah. Like we actually had someone on the podcast who spent zero on marketing, mobile game. They got a few 100 million downloads. And it was a very similar story to Flappy Bird. And the reason it worked is influencers picked it up. So someone said on a previous podcast, when I brought up Flappy Bird, he was like, actually, the reason it shot off is because PewDiePie played it and then everyone else played it. And then that was his marketing. But that's still like the product then did its thing. And we had it was a last year on the podcast, the Baby in Yellow, and the YouTube scene for that game is like cult following. But
Yeah.
the game has crazy amount of downloads, probably not the same revenue that you'd be used to, but it has happened. But in that kind of environment where it can be picked up by the YouTube or the streamer scene.
Had the same for like Five Nights at Freddy's. That's another great example, right?
Like
the YouTube community just like absolutely fell in love with that product, the kind of jump scary element of it.
Yeah.
And, from Markiplier to like everybody and their mother was playing that game on YouTube, and that earned media just blew it out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a really interesting concept because you can't build a game for that type of audience. It just doesn't exist in the context like, okay, I'm going to sit down and actually design a game for YouTubers. And I think even more specifically, Harry, what we see today is that the demographic shifts, the sands of those are shifting so quickly that even to have a concept today about something to design that you think could be relevant for that audience, in 6 months, you could have missed the mark completely, or you could hit it right on. But the chances of you being able to predict that are basically zero. And that is where we see the level of innovation, the level of like safety now is paramount. So innovation is sort of off to the side. You need the game to look good and play really well. And so that takes precedent over innovating into something great or having that crazy hook that's going to like really bring potentially those YouTubers to the table.
Yeah. I feel like you can't rely on it unless it's like one of your first few games and that's what you're banking on, like Mecha Chameleon style. It came up on the podcast and I found it interesting. Like they play tested or soft launches the game on Fortnite. So it was like a Fortnite game forever. And then it became a Steam game, which I found really interesting. Because like that's actually an interesting way to test the game with organic traffic. Now with mobile, I understand that's a lot different. So I want to basically put a pin in this and say, right now, yes, mobile advertising got more expensive, but also where you can get traffic and the fact that organic is so much harder, you basically this came up on a podcast before. Like it's so weird. Like mobile gaming for me is like a war. Like if someone can spend more money to get those users, if you can't get enough money per user, you can't win. Like there's not much else to do.
Yeah, that it's become that type of market, which is interesting because 15 years ago, even I'd say 8 years ago, and I'd say that even today, to some degree, most companies still feel this way, even though the public markets and valuations would completely disagree with them, is that the gaming companies think that they're the most important people in the room, by far,
In which room? Sorry.
in any room that they walk in.
In general.
In any room that they walk into, we're the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? We're the reason that you're all here. But then you look at AppLovin's stock, and you look at the IPO of Liftoff, and you look at, all of these media companies now who have made it out of these sort of what's happened in the last kind of 5 or 6 years. Those are the companies that hold everything. They hold the keys to all the castles in this world. And that's something that I didn't really understand. I remembered most of my career was spent on the other side of the business, obviously, running products, being head of marketing for various companies. And so whenever those media guys would come in, like I, sort of puff my chest up and I'd be like, "What are you doing for me?" Like I'm the prettiest person in the room, so to speak. And today, now kind of on the outside of looking in, I realize just how handicapped the gaming industry has become. There's sort of lack of understanding around even how marketing works at the core functional level has really inhibited them from fully taking advantage of what exists in the market today. And
Hmm.
I think that's an advantage that has been lost in a lot of ways. And I think there's another sort of small touch point on this that I'd like to kind of bring up, which is that, in a lot of industries, the media buyer, that's a profession. If you think about, an FMCG, or like a big P&G or Nestle or whatever, the people who are running those media buys, like they've been there forever, right? And they understand the industry and they understand the ins and outs of their field, and they can really kind of come to terms with how that media is bought. And those Havas's and those WPPs, they really are at the beck and call of those businesses. But in gaming, those media buyers are, 1, 2, 3 years, and then they're moving on to something else. They're going from a media buyer to an account manager to a head of marketing to a VP. There's a
With you. So it's not like it's not necessarily respected, but like it's not got the same like, oh, this is an individual contributor. We need to be as senior as possible.
yeah, it's like if you look at the age range of a person who's coming in who's buying media today in the gaming space, it tends to be a more junior position. Maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 5 years. Generally, you've jumped around for a couple of companies, but it would be very rare to find somebody that isn't a head of marketing or isn't a VP of marketing with 10 years of experience. Because at that stage, you're essentially moving on into that kind of upper echelons, into management, into
Interesting. Yeah,
whatever.
because that's not the same in other industries. Like when I speak to my marketing bros, I guess like the marketing agency bros, like media buyer, 6 figures, like super respected, super hard to find a good one, right? And when I googled what it was like, oh, like the person who runs the ads, and they need to decide where to get those ads. Like, yes, that's very complicated. But when I first heard media buyer, I was like, that can't be that hard. But then when you think about, there's levels to all of this, right? So it's interesting because I like to always draw parallels to like my world. So I'm in the world of, posting content. I'm now doing it on YouTube and LinkedIn. And I realize when you have enough attention, you can do whatever you want with that attention, and you can pivot product towards attention if you have to, at least in my world, right? Now, when I'm thinking of a game, if I'm shit high making a good product, but I don't have the attention, I'm fucked. Like, basically now what? Especially mobile games, right? So just a direct question here, like if I'm one of these big studios, because I see the layoffs and I speak to some of them, right, and they're struggling, and then is it simply just a marketing problem, like they just do not have the skill to get marketing, get ROI? Because I'm sure everyone's trying really hard, but given your perspective, I'm wondering, like, what do you see happening there? Like, why are some winning and some, not doing so well?
It's a good question. I think that's the $1 billion question. And I think there's a number of factors. I think on the one hand, you've got companies, there's no slack anymore in this industry. Nobody has patience. It's become an industry of like rapid success or rapid failure. And let's prioritize those two things. If we don't see success in a very short period of time, like we don't want to be the company that left the product on for an extra 2 years and lost tens of millions of dollars and had to kill it. So that existed 10 years ago. A company might soft launch for 2 years. I mean, just look at Supercell. Look at the timelines that they were able to
Yeah.
achieve before they ever even launched that product. You just don't really see companies able to do that anymore unless they're a massive behemoth company that's sitting on tons of cash. But that small team, or even that medium-sized company that's got, 25 employees or 30 employees, maybe they're making $20 million a year, which would be super respectable for 30 million, and maybe they're putting, 2 or 3 million in the bank every year. It's not enough money to really just put your hopes and dreams in a product that you're going to just continuously optimize for the next 18 months. And so, so on the one hand, you've got an industry which has really telescoped down into like things need to happen quickly. I don't know whether that's a hyper casual kind of like ethos coming in, like test quickly, rapid deployment, kill it if it's not working, and on to the next thing. There's so many games that just die on the chopping block before they ever even get a chance. And then you hear of companies that really do take the time and effort to invest in that. And, sometimes they make it work. And again, sometimes they don't. And I think, so today, I think what we're seeing is the byproduct of just what happens when an industry sort of gets flipped upside down, right? When the money that used to pour in stops or becomes much more contentious to get, right? You have to build a product that people think will make money. And so once that starts happening, if you don't show the KPIs that you need immediately, then the money's gone, right? And so you're really kind of at the whim of how that system works.
I'm
And
wondering.
yep, sorry.
No, go. Finish your thought.
No, and so studios today, unlike, 7, 8, 9 years ago, I think they have a greater perspective on what has worked historically. And so they are quicker to make those decisions. I don't necessarily think that that is always the right decision, but it might be the right decision at that time for the business. And because things are happening so aggressively, so quickly in the space, things changing all the time, I just don't think that there's enough like people just don't have enough time in their day to like sit and think about like what's going on here. You when I ran marketing companies, back in 2014, 15, 16, one of the things that I really tried to deliver to the team was you should have time in your day to think. Like if you need to just go to the park for an hour or 2 hours and take your notebook or your laptop and just disconnect a little bit and just think about what's happening, that's really important to me that you have that time, because it's in those moments where you're actually able to sort of step back, observe like what's happening, and then make an action plan that makes sense. But today, everything is urgent and important, and it's more so than in any other time. We're just inundated with so much signaling constantly, and AI has 100% accelerated that.
Yeah.
That people are expected to have all this information in their head all the time, and there's almost no moment where they're, hey, like, is this the right decision? Like, can we make this change more effective if we just slow down? Doesn't exist.
Yeah, I see it in our business, like when I get like new ideas, like, oh, I'll do a conference in 2 months. Why not? It came from a conversation I had at a bar with someone else, and the conversation started with us saying we should say no to more things. But then as we were talking, it's like, oh, this is a great idea. If I never went out, that would have never happened, because that's the last thing I should have done for my business in my head. But actually talking through, it's like, actually, no, this is possible. Bit of a weird relative example from my side, but like hearing what you're saying, AI can be a massive distraction, especially for us. Like I've definitely had a bit too many hours on AI, but it's always more pros than cons so far. But I can only imagine how it is in a mobile gaming company where people had been laid off and saying, all right, guys, we've got to really go for it. And then it's like, well, I ain't getting laid off for making a bad decision. And then the incentives are like, don't rock the boat. And it's like, wait a minute, if we never rock the boat, everyone's the same. And then we're destined to like sink. I feel like it always comes down to like incentives. Like there isn't an incentive to like jump up. And the reason I'm so confident in saying that is I've had consultants on this podcast, and some of them have told me like I gave advice to this mobile gaming company. They implemented the advice after 10 months and then got amazing results. But it took 10 months of like, I don't know. It's like, guys, it will take 2 weeks to test. Like, yeah, but we don't know. It's like, that's the whole point. And it was like really weird to me. It was like, guys, you got the time. It's like, why are these things not happening?
I think you're touching on a really interesting topic here, which is just the general risky, like how risky are you feeling?
Yeah.
The risk averseness.
Yeah, I'm a
is
9 out of
now
10 risk. My brothers joined the
I'm
business.
also,
Now I'm 8 out of 10.
yeah.
But yeah.
And so today money is tight. time is tight, everything's tight, and so you're much more sensitive to risk. You don't want, because you know that you're not going to get this time back. And the
Hmm.
the irony of that is that the decisions you make under that type of environment actually tend to be poorer, not because they weren't risky, right? But you lack the sort of diagnostic set of, or the tool set now to even assess risk. And so what I would say is that your current business model is super risky. Running at 1,000 miles an hour, trying to like tackle every problem all the time, all at once, that's a massive risk to your business because you never have the moment to pick your head up and say, like, are things going really well? Maybe quarterly or biannually, you do some kind of OKR, or you're doing, some sort of like management review. But in your day-to-day task, this idea of like doing a postmortem, doing a retrospective, okay, it happens a bit in the technical side, but even often in the technical teams, like they don't have the time for that. And so they make, they repeat the same mistakes, stuff
Yeah.
is bug, things don't work out the right way. So this adverseness to risk that has sort of permeated these spaces. And I think you hit the nail perfectly on the head when you said that people just don't stand up. They do not want to rock the boat, especially if they're looking at all their friends getting fired across the board. They're like, I got a job. I just got to like do this thing. And as long as like I don't make any mistakes, then maybe I'm okay. The reality is that if they don't innovate and they're not bringing success to the table, the company's dead in the water. And I think some companies do a good job of, helping to elevate those individuals who do bring good contribution. And when you put that on a pedestal and you say, this is the sort of exemplary employee, we want more people like that, then that will translate into more people thinking like, oh, like think like a CEO, so to speak.
Yeah.
But that is few and far between. And there are
Yeah.
countries and cultures, by the way, that really revere that attitude. There are two specifically that I can think of. First is the Israelis. So they really respect people who like, I have an idea and I'm gonna like push it through, yes or yes. And then, that really drove this massive kind of growth within the industry. And now you're seeing it coming out of the Turkish market, right? They're a tight-knit group. They respect each other and they're able to have difficult conversations about, I don't think this is the right decision, or we need to take this direction. And it can come from any level in the organization. And I think that plays a lot into why those companies are successful now, because they are riskier mainly because they're taking advice from a wider group of people. So yeah, that might feel riskier, but they're actually making more informed decisions because it isn't
Yeah.
a pooled resource at one top. It's not one group at the very top making all the choices or decisions.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move into now what. So I've listened to this podcast. If I've listened this far, I'm clearly interested. Okay, what do I do with this information? So we're talking to a few types of people here. The individual marketer, person who's working in a mobile gaming company in general, just want to understand kind of where's my company going, but also the person in charge, right? The person who's a leader who wants to make better decisions and maybe get some of the culture from those two markets that you mentioned, or just like be aware of like, okay, how do we increase risk? And I want to first start with almost a second layer of the land, like, okay, where can we get users? Because I feel like some people will just refuse to know, like, by the way, there's more than one place to get new users. So, yeah, what are the ways? So, where are people currently getting kind of new users?
Yeah, I mean, you've got your sort of standard SRNs. Okay, you got your TikToks, Facebooks, Googles, AppLovin, right? I mean, those four are essentially covering like 90%
Hmm.
of the entire ecosystem. There's a category that's become quite interesting, which not a lot of people are talking about, and it's not the rewarded category. It's sort of this affiliate category that has really become prevalent. That these young guys who really understand like how to promote products within TikTok, we're seeing that also now starting to bleed into CTV. So people who really understand, the right way to like grab that attention and then direct that user to even to a landing page, collect that information, increase the kind of like raw moment, and then kick them on into like a number of products. It works okay for gaming, but for rewarded products, for FMCG, for apps and whatnot, this is a huge industry. And
Mm.
I can tell you the gaming space really isn't taking advantage of it in the most effective way. We think about influencers as like people who do YouTube, or sometimes TikTok kind of promote my game, talk about my game. Whereas these guys are taking a very different angle and really able to kind of crack the code. It's not always above board, honestly, but they're very, you got these 16, 17-year-old kids earning six, seven, $800,000 a month, essentially just buying media on TikTok. And that's an area that I see is really growing. And as I mentioned, we're now feeling like it's coming into the CTV world as a lot of these companies are starting to kind of pop up and like, hey, you can buy from me, you can buy from me. There's a lot of it's pretty lax in terms of regulations on sort of what kind of ads can be shown. And so creating these kind of more generic, longer format content seems to work. And pushing them not to a specific product, but more to an experience that then like pushes them into different avenues. That has seemingly worked quite well.
Okay.
And then the other category, which has sort of been on everybody's mind, tip of everybody's tongue, is the rewarded category. And I see that, I think it was a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, when it sort of really kind of reared its head, and people really didn't understand it. I think people still really don't understand it, to be honest. I see that
What don't they understand? Maybe help them here.
well, I think at the fundamental core, I think they don't understand what type of risk the publisher is taking to send that user to your product, and the lengths and the steps that we go through in order to ensure that that user is not fraudulent and is doing the right actions. But we're not, holy men or women that are like ordaining and able to sprinkle, pixie dust across all these games. We're taking the lead from the game side. So if they're not really understanding how that traffic is going to function within their product, and they're saying you must run it this way, this obviously can create conflict between
So
like
imagine I'm a publisher for a second. What are you saying that I could be doing wrong with sending to rewarded traffic? Like, what do you mean by that? Like,
yeah. So let's just take a little heartbeat here and say like, what is rewarded traffic? Okay, so I'm a rewarded company. I acquire users into my rewarded platform, right? And either could be free cash or misplay or playful or whatever. There's a plethora of those out there. Okay, so I've got my media buying team and we're acquiring traffic. Okay, so we're sending them into our profiling mechanism, whether those are surveys or whatever, device graphs. And so we're starting to really understand that user, what's their purchasing power, what's their propensity to making purchases, what kind of games they like, right? We're collecting data and they're building a profile. And then we're presenting them with options. Hey, download Coin Master, download Dice Streams, download Travel Town, whatever that might be. And depending on how likely that person is to perform specific actions, specifically, are they likely to pay in that product? We might give them the higher payout tier or the lower payout tier, right? There's like also a degree of flexibility in how a user or the type of offer user is going to see. Maybe it's the same offer, but a different payout. Then the user enters into that product, right? And as long as they're a first time install, we've risked buying that user, and now we're risking paying that user to play that product, right? So the advertiser in this context has essentially said, look, I'm willing to pay my $5, $7, $10, $15 CPI, and that's it. That's my risk. Okay. Obviously, the risk for me then is that I'm not going to get the return that I was expecting. But at that moment, all of the risk beyond that is now on the rewarded company, because not only have they paid to have that user come into their product, they're now going to pay to have them download something else. And so they can really, and we've seen it a bunch of times. I've helped a number of companies in the space. And, one of the questions I'm always asking is like, okay, what's your fulfillment rate? Like how much money of your total revenue are you actually paying to users? I've heard companies that are like, yeah, we got it wrong. And we actually ended up paying 60 or 70% to our user base. And I'm like, holy crap. So that meant for every dollar you earned, 70 cents went back to the user.
Yeah, so you start at 30% gross margins for everything else in the business.
Yeah, it doesn't work, right? And so on the one hand, it's very important and very difficult for the rewarded company to like nail down the right structure, making sure that breakage model works really well. On the other side, in order to get the best value from those types of users, the gaming companies or the companies that are looking to acquire that traffic, they really need to understand that they're acquiring a user who will literally do whatever you tell them to do. Make a purchase, I'll make a purchase. Do this action, I'll do this action. Get to this level, I'm going to get to that level. And as long as that is understood, that this user is coming for a different type of meta experience, aka trying to make some money here, and you can guide that user into a flow that eventually gets them hooked into your product, it takes a little bit more effort. But you have to come at it from that perspective. Like, this user is not here for my game, and that's okay. But I have enough mechanisms, enough metas, enough cool stuff to show them that I will convert those players into a long-term player by virtue of the sort of interest and things that I have in my game.
I mean, It doesn't sound like rocket science to me because I'm thinking that's what a free sample does. You hopefully
Exactly.
you give them a bit of cheese, they'll buy the big block in the supermarket and become a lifelong member. You might give out so many cheeses where you run out of money, but that's on you to change the numbers. It's I'm listening to you say that. It reminds me of bookkeeping like casinos. So in a past life, I was a professional gambler. So I used to rinse the bookies of the offers. So I was basically the rewarded bonus abuser times a million. So I had like 30 accounts. I was like the bad guy. And when I'm hearing you say that, it's like, yeah, I could just take advantage if someone misunderstood and how quickly it was to get the level. But then the rewarded company takes the risk of doing those signals. But from the publisher side, from my understanding, we just need to make sure that, yes, I'm going to pay extra potentially, but by paying extra, I'm making sure they go through an experience which should hopefully increase LTV. And it's up to me to be able to understand that. I don't know if I got that right.
Yeah, the publisher in this context takes very little risk within the experience. Excuse me, the advertiser. The advertiser takes much less risk than the rewarded company in this experience. The rewarded
Hmm.
company is working on what they call a breakage model, right? So, they're losing money for most of that user's life cycle. In fact, most of the users who actually get through, those are losses for them,
Yeah.
right? Because those users are getting to the final levels, and really great user for an advertiser within a rewarded category is actually a loss for the rewarded company, because that person is doing all
Yeah.
the actions and they're paying them out, right? And so there's a balance there. But and ironically, that's where my company is really starting to come in and trying to help those rewarded companies kind of manage that flow a little bit more effectively. We can talk about that a little later. But what I was saying before about, the game developers not really understanding that is, I think they think that the reward companies out there like just trying to screw them, right? Like, oh, you're sending me all this crap traffic and it doesn't really work. And for me, that I'm always like, no, you've just done a poor job at understanding what this traffic really is. And so when you set up your account or you set up your campaign, you either, and maybe the rewarded company also isn't great at setting this up. Like that's real thing too, right? These guys, everyone's fallible. They're all humans at the end of the day. But you really need to understand your own product to even understand if it's a good candidate for that type of traffic. A good company will take that rewarded user and oftentimes give them a very unique treatment that they wouldn't give to a user that's
Almost
coming
like
from a
a
Facebook.
parallel version of the game.
100% more ads, for example, or more aggressive in-app purchase flows, or different type of tuning mechanism, which is a little bit easier for users to get through certain levels so that they can achieve those milestones in the rewarded
Mm.
app experience, and that gets them kind of more excited about. So there's all these reflexive behaviors that you can start to build in. But if you're like, my rewarded traffic is going to come in the same as my Facebook traffic or whatever it is, and we'll just like throw the cards up and see how they, so see where they fall, then you're doomed to fail. And
Okay.
you'll most likely blame the rewarded company for sending you terrible users. And I would venture that you didn't understand the traffic to begin with, and you
Yeah.
probably could have made a great product synergy there, but you just failed to understand it.
Can I be devil's advocate? So I'm a publisher. I just discovered what rewarded is. Don't shoot me. And I want to use rewarded. Should I just not ask the rewarded company, hey, what's working for the other guys? And we can take your advice? Is there a danger there?
Yeah, there is. The danger is that the rewarded company may not have any clue as to what your product really is and what your product's about. At the end of the day, a great setup within a rewarded environment is all about matching the events to your meta milestones in your product. So if you've got a really strong meta in your game, and that meta is maybe a bit difficult to get to, maybe it takes 2 days or 3 days, well, then you better be sure that your rewarded sequence gets a user to that place so that they can fully experience
Yeah.
the
You can't
the
have them churning because of difficulty or whatever.
right. The goal of a rewarded ecosystem is to drop a player in the moment or the place where they're likely to feel great and have a great game experience, and then they're going to earn a little bit of cash on the other side, right? And you can
Mhm.
marry those two moments together to hopefully allow that person some like, wow, I really did enjoy this product. I'm going to just keep playing it regardless of whether I continue to get paid or not. In fact, I'm going to go on and just make some purchases of my own. And so when you start to change the mentality of how you think about that traffic and think of it more like a pace horse, like a guiding force within the product, and less like I'm just going to throw a bunch of random events and pray that this user kind of completes those actions. And, if it works, it works. Then you will find yourself either wasting a lot of money or becoming very upset at the rewarded company thinking that they have, fucked you.
Yeah. All right. So let's take the example of a publisher doing like 2 to 10 million a year. They're looking to spend with their advertising dollars. We've mentioned a few channels, right? We've mentioned the social networks, potentially these affiliates, which is a new space, rewarded. What else is there?
Honestly, not a whole lot else.
Okay.
I think the industry in and of itself is consolidated down. Well, you've got CTV as well. I think CTV is probably the other channel. So I mentioned it briefly. I would say that's probably the next kind of frontier of media that people are really going to dive into.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Less on TVs, but connected devices, like a DAZN or Hulu or whatever, like inside the mobile experience. Obviously, we still have it on TVs where people can take, QR codes. That's becoming more prevalent. Obviously, China's been using QR codes since the dawn of time, and their entire livelihood, it seems like, is connected to these QRs. You
Yeah,
see
it's
them
like a cultural thing, right? Like you.
completely, completely cultural. It's unbelievable. I mean, I was in China in 2016, and you literally did everything with QR codes, everything you could possibly think of. Yeah, that thing you're thinking of, QR code. Yeah, that. So, whereas we barely did scratch the surface of it, and now obviously it's like a key mechanism for tracking users who come in through CTV, but the media that's available is massive, especially since most of that content, people just aren't watching terrestrial TV anymore. It's almost exclusively streaming services. Obviously, you have an older demographic there, but there's a major push into the connected TVs, the connected devices that allow for those services to exist. And I think that is a major part. Obviously, you see Vibe just got bought 1.2 million. Walmart? No, who bought them? Walmart? Was it Walmart? I don't remember.
We'll find out.
Whatever. It happened. That's a big stake in the ground. And I think a lot of other CTV type company will see other kind of acquisitions as, kind of more of those companies, demonstrate success. And there is another part to all of this, right? Which is getting your marketing side right is only a small part of your business. You also need to get the monetization right. And I think in that area, there are some interesting companies coming up. You really don't have a lot of competition at the moment. You basically have Apple Oven, who owns that ecosystem. You had Unity buying Iron Source, with Iron Source like Level Place, their mediation essentially is dead, right? Almost nobody uses that anymore. And so Max has just become like the default placement for all things monetization in games. And I saw that, a couple years ago. I actually came in from the rewarded space. So I had built a couple rewarded products myself, and I wanted to create a solution that would allow me to monetize those users without having to have them download multiple products, right? Download CoinMaster, I make money. Then I have to in order to make more money, I got to send you to Dice Streams, right? That's how I made my money. So we built this company called Trofeo essentially to allow us the opportunity to not have to go that route. And so rather than, so you'd hit level 2, I give you your dollar, you hit level 3, I give you that dollar, but I'd also combine that with this sort of a victory offer, right? Take a Hulu free trial or take this major discount or whatever. And so the user was actually receiving this happiness moment. They completed the action in the game, they're coming in, and now all of a sudden, oh, I got this other thing, which was and this time was mostly CPA offers, and I could earn 10, 15, even $20 from that CPA. And so I was earning more from that user collecting his dollar and then taking that offer than I was from the person downloading the game to begin with. And what it's allowing me to do was give better offers, within the reward flow and sort of try to keep them consistently playing, in the CoinMaster experience, rather than having to consistently try to push them into new products. And it, of course, improved the gross profit of the business. And so we ran that for about a year, and then we realized actually we have something here that could work really well for the gaming space. And we really recognized that there was this opportunity to take advantage of all of those amazing moments that those game developers had been building for the last 15 years in these products. And so Trofeo is really this concept of victory marketing, finding these right moments in the gamer's experience where they've had a great moment. And then we're marrying that with this advertising offer. We've gone out and connected with over 350 advertisers across a bunch of different markets. The US is obviously our kind of bread and butter at the moment, but we're looking for these very unique types of brands which really don't have a place in the mobile gaming ecosystem. If you think about a loyalty program or a QSR, like a quick service restaurant, who's offering like a free hamburger or free gasoline or whatever that might be, sure, they could show that in a rewarded video treatment, but it's coming at such a weird moment for that offer to appear, or an interstitial to just kind of, like, what's happening over
Yeah,
here? Like, where's the X button? Like, just tap. I'll just
exactly.
tap
It's,
in the
it's
zone
it's a
until the X
reflex
button.
now.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're doing is we're marrying that with that really positive experience in the game, and so the user's really seeing it as a completely unique something I earned, right? I earned this moment, and those users are then excited to take it. It's not a video. It doesn't take 25 minutes for you to like find the X button and whatnot. It's just a simple pop-up that says, "Congratulations, Harry, you earned a Hulu free trial. Claim or I don't want it."
This is really interesting because this can help both parties, right? So if I'm a publisher looking to make more money from my game and I don't want to put in banner ads, for example, I could do these type of ads, so it can actually increase the revenue. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, what we talk about, we call ourselves, we're purely incremental. So I'm a huge proponent of ads in games. I think it is a huge monetization source. Sorry, a huge source of monetization, and if done effectively, can add massive amounts of profitability to the business. What we are calling for, what we are bringing to the table, is we are monetizing moments which are simply not available within that typical structure. And so we're the company that's going to add that extra 10, 15, even 20% on top of what you're making today, because you can't do that once you've sort of exhausted all of your max
There's like
impressions,
no
right?
more inventory, right? Like where else can you put an ad? Like you've got some
Exactly.
companies where they've got their like it's in the game, but there's only certain games that can do that, right?
Yeah, you've got in-game, you got companies like Anzu, which is doing like their,
Yeah.
branded content, like they brand the billboard in the background and they've got their little thing on the felt of the table or whatever. You've got companies like Odeo who are doing audio ads, right? You've got Max, which is doing impressions, excuse me, banners, interstitials, rewarded video. And specifically with Max, like once you start adding impression 15 or 16 in that session, that impression is pretty worthless. And
I've
so
got a
what
visual here to make it clear. So I think this is explaining it quite nicely. So like this is a moment where you can't really, or you wouldn't want to put a traditional ad. He's like, oh, I just felt this good thing. So it's just
right,
like, it's all about positioning. It's crazy, huh? It's like, that could easily be a banner ad that you would want to skip, but because it's framed like that, it's like, yeah, sure.
yeah.
It's really interesting, huh? So that's, can you give me a sense of scale? Because this is a new business, right? Like start of the year, like how's it going? Are publishers liking it? Like, how the advertisers feeling it, or what's the crack?
Yeah. So, we officially launched in January. We have scaled pretty rapidly. We just crossed 2 million ARR last month, so very
Congrats.
excited. We see, a ton of opportunity, on the horizon. Advertisers are really enjoying the type of quality as well. It's a very unique type of individual who ends up coming into their product, right? Because if you think about it from any other, except for intent marketing, say I've come to Google now, I'm like intending to do something. Okay, this is what's there. I'm diving in. Even with that, it's still like you're carrying that emotion through your journey. And so you're saying like, I intend to find this thing. I found it. There it is, 1-to-1, right? I'm done. But in every other type of marketing experience, it's got to be like something that catches your attention. It's like, "Oh, look over here, boom, yeah,
Yeah.
wow,
Or like,
over here."
for example, when I watch a ad to get coins, like I'm only watching this ad to get the coins. Like this is one where it's clearly a choice. Like, do you want it? Yes or no? And I don't know, it feels less icky. I know it's an ad deep down, even though I'm running a marketing business, but yeah, just from a player perspective, I can imagine like, oh yeah, I would just make a decision, and it feels really chill.
And there's another thing too here, which is that, the majority of the inventory that you're going to see inside of a rewarded experience or an interstitial is going to be for another game, right? I know Apple Oven is making a big push into e-commerce and they're bringing a lot of those brands and those brand dollars, but the reality is the best eCPMs are still going to come from the game developers.
95% of my ads are other games, and I until I started this podcast realized like why, and I was like, oh okay, because games make, I guess they can afford the most.
Yeah, well, they're the ones that convert the best, right? They have the highest affinity between the product you're in
Yeah,
and the product that you might like. What we're bringing to the table is an entirely new set of advertisers, right? We're looking at, e-commerce brands, we're looking at travel, health and beauty, subscription services, streaming services, right? Major, discount websites, certain types of like sweepstakes operators, things that, don't really have a traditional place in a gaming moment where they can actively advertise effectively. And so because of that, we're not just bringing in incremental revenue, we're also bringing in an incremental ad dollar. So it's not like we're going to Moon Active and saying, hey, give us more money. And then Moon Active is sort of pulling budget from someplace else to give it to us. Like, no, we're bringing in a completely fresh set
Yeah.
of advertiser dollars.
Hey, someone innovated, Adam. We found them. It was you.
This guy.
No, it's just super cool. Before we started recording and you explained the concept, I was like, that's amazing. So yeah, it's really cool. The fact that I feel like, just to understand, do any publishers use this to advertise other games, or is it like a no, or is it?
No, like it's not that we're completely against games, because as I just pointed out, it is some of the highest affinity products in the market. And so, the goal here is always to look at the publisher and figure out what is the best thing for those users and to deliver it in the most effective way. The biggest difference here is that in order to be on our network, you have to have something of tangible value to the user, right? And so,
So you're not just
oftentimes,
accepting anyone to be an
right.
advertiser.
Well, it's not like, how do you promote CoinMaster? Like, what are you telling the user? You're saying to him or her, like, here's a new free game. No, that's not a.
You have to give him like $10 worth of VIP pass, but then it's like, what? I don't know. Like, even that is like, okay.
But you already mentioned something here, which is a little bit interesting, which is I think something that the industry sort of forgot, which is, do you remember? Well, maybe not. I'm a little.
I'll try.
Bit, in the early days, you'd go to the grocery store and you'd see your demo disc, your demo CD. Like, here's the first 10 minutes of gameplay of Doom, right? Or here's your first first level of Sims. You buy that thing for $5 or $3, or sometimes it would be free for you, and you play it, and then you'd be excited, and you'd buy the key, and you could play the rest of the game, right? And so somehow mobile gaming in general sort of just forgot about this idea that instead of telling the user about all the amazing things in the game, you could just be like, here's 10 minutes of gameplay for free, aka here's $5 worth of free currency, which is what you get when you first sign up anyway, and test the game. And if you like it, great. And if not, we've given you some time to investigate this product. And so we are trying to educate the market a little bit to help them understand that they don't have to promote the same way that they've been promoting for the last 15 years. That there is a new way, which is very old, that we can now make new again, given this treatment which we brought to the market.
Just double check. What's your opinion on premium mobile games? Do you think they're just like this side show? It's like, it's interesting, or?
I mean, it's.
I think I've got my answer.
No, because you've got products, obviously. You've got Minecraft. Well, sorry, you have a product in Minecraft, which is premium, which has been, I think, at the top of the premium charts for the last 10 years.
Like, I pay most of the games I play, apart from Clash Royale. The other ones are mobile premium games. But it's like a Balatro or Slay the Spire. So I just know the number isn't that high, but like, I'm just wondering, like, because you've been there, it's like, should I not be thinking about premium mobile games if I'm in this space?
It's a very different type of experience. I think premium mobile games are still a tradition. It's how you would think about a traditional game, right?
Yeah.
I bought the game, I own the game, I play the game. That's it. I finished the game. Done. Happy. Maybe there's some DLC. I buy the next version. Love it.
Yeah, for me, I just buy roguelike premium games, so I feel like, I've got endless years of entertainment.
Free-to-play games, freemium games, are games as a service. And so those are not games. Those are hobbies. This is a content track that you will now step into, and then you will play this content track essentially for the next 6 or 7 years. There's no end to this content. There's a constant influx of new things that are coming, but the fundamental gameplay is essentially the same. And you're okay with that, generally speaking. It's not a bad solution by any stretch. It's just not a traditional game that you would suggest, you would think about. And so there is this kind of dichotomy now between, the whole industry was built on freemium and this idea of how games should be. And then you've got like the rest of the gaming space being like, well, all of Steam and, console games. And obviously some of them have tried to capitalize on the kind of what they would call microtransactions or whatever. But, just look at Battlefield 2 and talk about like what happened when, those companies tried to like build in these ridiculous economies and people lost their shit. I am paying $70 for a game, and now I have to pay $100 to just play the game. Like, that's insane to me.
Yeah.
Whereas a freemium game might be like, well, this dude paid $250,000 to play the game. So,
Yeah, it's completely different space. Cool. I've got a few quick fire questions, but I want to make sure I ask you this. So, based on the type of listeners listen to this whole thing, right? And we've covered a lot of ground, lay of the land, where to get advertisers. What haven't we talked about that you think people should know more about? Like, what do you think people need to hear?
I think we covered a lot of stuff today. I would say what I think people need to hear is that if you're a marketing manager and you're starting out doing your buys, I think at no other time in history is it more important for you to really understand the game that you're marketing. You just don't have any wiggle room, right? The failure point is so high and the amount of money that you need is also very high. And so going out there and thinking that creative optimization is going to save you is just it's a drop in the bucket. I think that's what a lot of people used to focus on, like, oh, we'll just optimize creative and that's the or no, creative's okay. But if you have terrible signaling coming in from your product, if your AppsFlyer integration isn't well set up, or you're not hitting the right KPI firing the right event, that's feeding back into Max's, bidding algorithm, no amount of creative optimization will save you. And so I think people really need to stop thinking about marketing and product as these like separate things in a business and seeing them as like the same side of it. Sorry, same half of the same side of the same coin, one half of the same coin, whatever. You understand, right? The thing on the other side, that's the other side, whatever, when they come
They are
together.
connected.
Yes, it's the same. It's the same business. And that is still, for me, something that I feel like a lot of companies skip over. Product has their thing, marketing has their thing, you do yours, and we'll do ours. And, if you're a marketing guy, you take that product out to lunch or to dinner or out to a movie or on a date. I don't know, whatever you do to get that insider information and become friends with that person, because that relationship is far more valuable than the relationship between you and your marketing artist.
Wow. So let's say on the flip side, I'm the leader, and I just heard you say that. How do I get my product team and marketing team to kind of either spend more time together? Like, what can I do structurally? I'm curious.
So at the end of the day, and this is something a lot of companies in my mind don't necessarily like to hear, you're a business. Shocking.
Shock. Yeah, yeah. Oh my God. Don't
You're here to
worry,
make
Adam. You're preaching to the choir.
yeah.
I have face-to-face conversations with indies, and I'm like, guys, what are we doing? And I'm like,
You're here to make money. Okay,
yes.
that's what's here. Like, I know you're artists. Don't you guys want to build amazing worlds and blah 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 blah? Then you should have gone to the console. Okay, full stop. You're in mobile gaming. You're here to make money. That's what we're here for. Therefore, if you need to spend money to make that money, then you sure as shit better understand how those players are working inside. What's the economy like inside your game? And I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to a product team and they're like, no, we prioritize retention, which is not a bad thing. I'm never going to say don't prioritize retention. But what I will say is that the marketing team is being told you have a day 7 ROAS target that you need to hit. And I can guarantee you that the product team is not given the same target. They're not looking at a day 7 ROAS number because they don't even understand what that is. Or in certain cases, they know the term or they get to some degree, but their incentives and their kind of alignment schemas are completely disconnected from that experience in a lot of ways. Hyper casual is very different. Obviously, shorter sessions, hybrid is a little bit better. But the deeper you go into those funnels, the more and more disconnected the marketing experience is from the actual product. And so companies that really are successful are the ones that understand that in order to work in this business, you need to understand how to make money. And that's the starting point. And so product and marketing work in tandem in order to facilitate value, not marketing sends users in and product just sort of like tries to sort them out.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's like they understand that kind of lifetime value is very important, but they're optimizing for retention. Marketing's optimizing for, I guess cheaper downloads, people who stay for 7 days plus. But then I'm like, okay, but then the secondary big KPI is money in the door. And I'm just putting my hand up. Like, if I was a product guy and I say, I can't optimize for money in the door because what if they churn and would get more lifetime value if they stay for years? But that doesn't change the fact that we need both KPIs at the same time.
Agreed. Think about it a little bit differently. Think about it from a marketing perspective. In order to get good signaling, you need things to happen quickly, right? If there's
Yeah,
an
you need
event
the feedback loop, right?
right, if there's an event that takes 4 days and that user never makes it there because they've gated a bunch of content that is, going to help increase monetization, but it happens on like the 16th session of whatever it is. And those users who get there are so far and few between that it's not enough signaling to help the algorithm acquire that type of traffic. then you've essentially killed your own golden goose opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's really what I'm talking about. So, when you think about that first time user experience, it's not, the first session, it's really like the first 3 days, because those 3 days are the most critical moments for marketing to be effective. Because if you fail in those moments, then your ability to generate long-term value for the business is essentially zero. And so the product team's ability to really understand, like, these are the moments that if we can get the right signaling, the marketing machine has all the power now to go and scale my business. But if we leave it to day 14, and that's really what we focus on in terms of the return monetization at that point, marketing is basically out there throwing cash, just hoping that they're going to hit that type of metric or that individual, and it's never going to work. Not never, but it's less likely.
Yeah. I'll end with this question. So you're on like a bajillion boards. Like I had to scroll like a a very long time. I don't want the insights you're giving to those boards, but you are probably one of the people who've advised hundreds. I probably could say that. You can tell me the real number, like of mobile games businesses. So if you could put something on a billboard right now and just make sure everyone listened. If you're thinking back to all the advising sessions you did, and you knew for a fact they would listen to that billboard and they would actually do it, what would you put on that billboard?
Don't let your marketing get ahead of your product. I think this is generally, for me, the most important kind of misalignment, is that people build products, and I'm not going to talk about this specifically for gaming. I'm going to just put this out there in general. It's actually easier to think about it in more of a SaaS type business, or a product business or an app business, rather than a gaming infrastructure. But it applies exactly the same to gaming, which is, you have an MVP, or you have and that, what is that V for you? The minimum viable product for me typically is something that I can monetize. And that's why I'm going to try and market it. Never let the marketing structure outpace that of product. Because what ends up happening is that you're starting to grow a business with dollars coming in, and you are now forever chasing to get ahead of that curve. And the likelihood that you will be able to, especially if that product becomes even remotely successful, is nearly impossible. And so obviously not every team has the time or the luxury to like build the product that they like. But for me, it's like, understand the product that you're making. What does it need to look like for you to test its viability? And then once you've tested that, and you see that it's successful, don't then say, okay, guys, now we're going to double down and 10x the marketing spend. Now let's make sure that there's enough content. Like, bring that product into a place where marketing can invest $10,000, $15,000, $100,000, $200,000 a day, but don't just rush in, because you will end up creating a monster for yourself that is very difficult to claw yourself back from.
It's funny because it's very timely for me, because I was taking that lesson as a service business, where it happened last October. We had clients, we were happy, and I signed one more, and I was like, whoa, we have no time. Why am I, as a CEO, spending all this time writing LinkedIn posts? It's like, that's not going to solve the problem. So it took a good 6 months to like hire a writing team, and now we're like there, and it's working. People retaining, we're signing bigger clients, and then I helped with the marketing infrastructure. We got more stuff, and I just realized again, it's like, oh wait, we can do even better. And now I'm like, literally like a seesaw. It's like, okay, improve marketing. If I put all my time for 2 months on marketing, everything blows up, and it's like a nice little, I say a nice little flip flop, but like, I'm trying my best to make sure product has that feedback loop on their own. But yeah, I haven't been through it on my mini version on my side with my service business. Like, it's so delicate. It's like,
Yeah.
you can just get distracted for 8 months. Like, fuck, everything's
Nothing,
now
nothing is
out of
worse.
whack.
Nothing is worse than having something great that isn't scalable, and that you try and scale.
Oh yeah,
And that, because everyone is, and you're pushing aggressively, and now everyone's scrambling to try and, they always talk about building the car while we're driving it. Like, that's a terrible idea.
yeah,
Every mechanic will tell you that that is a terrible idea, but somehow that analogy is like the go-to analogy for the world of gaming and or app development. And my message is, it's not a bad decision necessarily. Just don't put rocket fuel in that car.
yeah.
Okay for you to put in some fucking 85 octane, diesel or whatever that gets you where you need to go, keeps
Yeah.
the thing kind of moving forward, but don't attach a rocket to the back of it, because it's not going to function
No,
very long.
I hear the stories. People sending. I had a chat with someone. They spent 10 grand a month on LinkedIn ads, sent them to the website. The website didn't convert, but then also their product had retention issues. So I'm like, what are we doing here? Like all that money, let's fix
Yeah.
product, get more than 1 month of happy users, and it's like the problem is we haven't got enough sales. Like, is it? Like, no, not necessarily. Cool, Adam. We covered a lot. Thanks so much. Where can people find out more? Chat to you, whether it's about the stuff we talked about, but also Trofeo.
LinkedIn, I'm super active. You may already be one of my 35,000 contacts. Trofeo.io is the website. If you've got an app or you're a brand looking to get new users in a very kind of unique ecosystem, reach out. We've got people standing by to take your call.
Love it. Nice. Great. Adam, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, guys, if you enjoyed, subscribe, send it to a friend. Had a great time. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Cheers, mate.